I never imagined I'd become the prime target of our neighborhood's notorious HOA president. But in hindsight, I should have seen it coming. My name's James Mitchell. After 15 years working as a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime, I moved to Oakwood Estates in search of peace and quiet. The place looked perfect. Manicured lawns, silent streets, and a community pool that barely saw a ripple most days. What I hadn't accounted for was Karen Winters, the self-declared guardian of the neighborhood's standards and integrity. I met her at my very first HOA meeting. She sat at the head of the folding table in our community center, like a queen presiding over her court. Her ash blonde bob was cut with surgical precision, and she wore what I would later learn was her unofficial uniform, crisp khakis, and a polo shirt embroidered with the Oakwood Estates logo. When my wife and I introduced ourselves, Karen gave us a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, welcome to Oakwood," she said warmly, or at least the kind of warmth that comes from a script. "I trust you thoroughly reviewed our community guidelines. We pride ourselves on being the most well-maintained neighborhood in the county." I nodded politely, resisting the urge to mention that the so-called welcome packet was a 67-page manual, an absurd length for a subdivision with fewer than 50 homes. Determined to be a good neighbor, I smiled and assured her we'd follow all reasonable regulations. That was my first mistake. The word reasonable made her smile tighten, and I caught a flicker in her eyes, the kind that marks someone as a potential troublemaker. From that moment on, I was on her radar. The first few months were uneventful. We renovated the house, planted a garden that fit perfectly within the approved landscaping palette, and attended the neighborhood barbecue. Even there, Karen held court, cornering residents to lobby for a new rule about holiday decorations. Then came the security cameras. After a rash of package thefts in nearby communities, I decided to install a discreet but comprehensive system. 4 perimeter cameras, a video doorbell, and motion-activated lights. Nothing flashy, nothing ugly. I'd even triple-checked the HOA guidelines. No rule prohibited them, as long as they were tasteful and unobtrusive. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. Karen stood there, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. "Good afternoon, James," she said in a clipped tone. "I'm here on official HOA business. May I come in?" I led her inside and offered water or coffee. Both declined with a curt shake of her head. "I've received several complaints about your new security cameras," she announced, glancing down at her clipboard like it was a legal document instead of a sheet covered in her own handwriting. "Complaints? From who?" I asked. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that," she replied, voice dripping with authority. "The point is, these cameras are in clear violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines regarding exterior modifications." I retrieved my own copy of the guidelines and flipped to the section she cited. The HOA guidelines were clear. Security devices were permitted as long as they were unobtrusive. "These cameras are the same color as my trim and barely visible from the street," I pointed out, keeping my tone even. Karen's lips thinned. "The issue isn't visibility, James. It's privacy. Your cameras could capture neighboring properties and residents without their consent." I explained that every angle was adjusted to focus solely on my property, with minimal overlap into public spaces like the sidewalk. Perfectly legal under state law. But Karen wasn't interested in facts or legal precedent. She was interested in control. "The HOA board will be discussing this at our next meeting," she said, standing abruptly. "In the meantime, I expect those cameras removed within 72 hours. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Karen," I replied calmly. "They don't violate any HOA guidelines, and they're essential for my family's security." Her eyes hardened. "Then I guess we'll have to escalate. The HOA has ways of dealing with non-compliance." After she left, I weighed my options. As a prosecutor, I knew my rights, but I also knew how an HOA could make life miserable through fines and social pressure. Still, I wasn't about to dismantle a perfectly legal security system just because one self-appointed enforcer had decided it was a problem. Karen, however, was just getting started. The next day, I received an official letter from the HOA board. Later, I'd learned she drafted it herself without consulting the other members. It accused me of multiple violations and threatened daily fines of $50 until the cameras were gone. She even claimed they were causing community distress and invading privacy. It was laughable and blatantly false. I responded with a firm, professional letter of my own, citing the exact HOA bylaws and state laws on private security devices. I also reminded her that any violation hearings required proper notice to all involved parties. A reasonable person would have backed down. Karen wasn't reasonable. 3 days later, I came home to find my wife waiting for me, looking stunned. "You're not going to believe what happened," she said, leading me to the side yard. 2 of my cameras dangled from their mounts, wires exposed, lenses shattered. Someone had deliberately destroyed them. I rushed to check the remaining footage. And there she was, Karen Winters, in broad daylight at 10:15 a.m., marching onto my property armed with a broom, her face set in righteous determination. She swung at each camera, muttering about teaching people to follow the rules and maintaining community standards. The irony? She didn't seem to realize she was being recorded while destroying the very devices recording her. What she didn't know was that my system uploaded everything to cloud storage in real time. Even as she smashed my cameras, she was creating perfect evidence of criminal vandalism and trespassing. The damage was around $800, well above the threshold for criminal charges in our state. I picked up the phone and called the police immediately. The police arrived in under 30 minutes. They watched the footage, listened to my statement, and exchanged the kind of look cops get when the situation is both ridiculous and ironclad. So, one of them said, suppressing a grin, she destroyed security cameras without realizing they were recording her. "Oh, it gets better," I replied. "She has no idea what I do for a living. I'd never advertised my profession around Oakwood, not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't define myself solely by my job. But now, it seemed relevant that I'd spent the last 15 years as a federal prosecutor, specializing in cases where people abuse rules and power. The officers promised they'd be following up with her, and I thanked them before they left. I knew Karen wasn't the type to retreat gracefully, but this time, I had both the law and crystal clear evidence on my side. Sure enough, within an hour my phone lit up with her number. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was pure, Karen. "Call me immediately so we can resolve this misunderstanding before things get out of hand." I didn't call back. Instead, I spent the evening pulling the exact statute she'd violated, building a file for both criminal charges and a potential civil suit for the $800 in damages. The next morning, as I headed to my car, she was waiting in my driveway. She looked different. Hair slightly frizzed, makeup imperfect, the crisp HOA president veneer cracked. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "Involving the police was completely unnecessary. This is a neighborhood matter, something that should be handled by the HOA. I took a slow breath. "Karen, you trespassed on my property and destroyed $800 worth of security equipment. That's not a neighborhood matter. That's criminal vandalism. The police are simply doing their job. Those cameras were in violation. She started, but I cut her off. They were not in violation of any guideline, statute, or law. You know it. I know it. And now the police know it. The only person who broke any rules here is you." Her cheeks flushed scarlet. "Do you have any idea who I am in this community? I've been HOA president for 7 years. I protected property values through a recession and a pandemic. People respect me. Then you should have acted respectably." I said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get to work. I have a meeting with the district attorney this morning." That caught her. Her eyes narrowed. "District attorney? Why would you?" I allowed myself the smallest smile. "Karen, I'm a federal prosecutor. I specialize in cases where people abuse positions of authority. Now, I'm not handling your case. That would be a conflict of interest. But I know exactly how situations like this end in court." Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Winters was speechless. And in that silence, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What followed played out with the inevitability of a well-written legal brief. Karen was charged with criminal vandalism and trespassing. Because she had no prior record, the court offered her a diversion program, community service restitution, and a very public mark on her reputation. She accepted but only grudgingly. But losing the legal battle was only the beginning of Karen's unraveling. In small communities, news doesn't just travel fast. It spreads like wildfire. Within days, every resident in Oakwood Estates had heard about the HOA president who vandalized her neighbor's property and got caught in glorious high definition. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Karen arrived with her usual air of authority, trying to spin the whole incident as a gross overreaction and paint herself as the real victim. But when another board member demanded to see the security footage, the room went silent. The truth played out on screen, Karen broom in hand, smashing cameras while muttering about teaching people to follow the rules. There was no debate after that. The vote to remove her as HOA president passed 23-3. The only yes votes came from her husband and 2 friends who also sat on the board, a fact that only made the whole thing more embarrassing. The final blow came from outside the neighborhood. Karen's employer, a real estate company that marketed itself on integrity and trust, put her on administrative leave pending an internal review. Apparently, criminal vandalism wasn't a good look for someone selling homes. I saw her only once more before her fall from grace was complete. She was standing in her driveway, arms crossed, as a maintenance worker removed the HOA president parking sign from beside her mailbox. Her face was an unreadable mix of disbelief, anger, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of regret. Our eyes met as I passed with my dog. She opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, but then shut again, turned on her heel, and disappeared into her house. The door slammed shut with a hollow thunk that seemed to echo through Oakwood Estates. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt peaceful.